Hello, this will be a video lecture on the academic honesty portion of the Beyond the Classroom study plan. Academic dishonesty can take a number of different forms. In the end, it comes down to how honest we're being about the source and validity of our information. Sometimes that has to do with whether or not we're actually the source in specific, thinking of, say, plagiarism concerns, in which we present writing that isn't ours as though it were. Other times that can have to do with information that we're presenting as being either more credible or even existing at all, which might be either taken from a different source that lacked credibility or may not have existed at all if we, say, fabricated it. In general, academic dishonesty tends to get thought about as cheating first. Really, this is any action that unfairly benefits either you or somebody else in your creation of academic work. It's an umbrella term, but it does help to bring into the conversation the idea that we're looking at unfair benefit here. That's really where the problem starts. Now, if we go just a little bit more specific than cheating, that takes us to deception. Deception is the giving of false information concerning an academic assignment having to do with either the assignment subject matter or its terms, such as due dates, guidelines, etc. One example of this would be giving a false excuse to an instructor in order to get an extension on a piece of work. Basically, deception has us taking advantage of what is always a significant gray area. There are always areas of uncertainty that we could exploit if we really want to, but maintaining the basic credibility, believability, and good relationship with an instructor means making sure that we don't engage in deceptive practices. This is part of the goodwill that will help us to be able to benefit not just from the class, but our relationship with the instructor for the course. The next academic dishonesty that is worth acknowledging at least is fabrication, although really this is much more of a problem in the higher education and research levels. Fabrication is the falsification of wholesale invention of data, information, or citations, and this is where academic dishonesty takes the form of basically coming up with something either out of nowhere or some information that is so very far out of its original context that it no longer means what it did before. This is sometimes used in the liberal arts, but more frequently it's in the hard sciences, where, again, data might be invented to support experimental findings. Where fabrication does factor into the liberal arts, sometimes that's where a writer might just make up a source and cite that source in their writing simply because they feel that they need it. And this is really problematic because it could be difficult to catch. In the end, though, the more fabrication we do, the less academic work we're putting into what we produce, and that will show itself to be a problem in the long run. Really, the form that this takes the most often at the college level is plagiarism, and this is something that I think we've all heard of. Plagiarism, unfortunately, though, has a number of different working definitions. Some think of this as simply submitting someone else's work as one's own. This could be taking passages from one's previous work without citing it, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. This could be paraphrasing and discussing someone else's work without citing it. We could be combining content from multiple sources without making it clear what is from where. We might be using quotations without citing the source. We might be citing some but not all necessary passages. We could be combining cited and non-cited sections of the piece without distinguishing the one from the other. We might be providing adequate citations but not paraphrasing thoroughly enough. We might be inaccurately citing so that it's not clear what's directly quoted and what's not. Finally, we might simply be relying too heavily on outside work and bringing little original thought or work to our own. Now, I'd mentioned that there was one particular form of this that I would talk about a little later, and this is what gets called paper recycling. That is the reuse of one's own academic work from the past, but for a new purpose, without significant revision to that work or transparency about the source of the work. You think of it like this: academic work is spent up once it's been handed in for a grade. It can only be resubmitted after it's been heavily revised. Think of it a little bit, and this will be a little bit more relevant once we can all go out again. Think of this like stopping at, say, Tim Hortons for coffee on your way into school or work. You go there the first day, you order your coffee, give the person at the drive-thru your money, they give you the coffee, and you're done. That's it. The exchange is over. The thing to remember here, though, is that you can't simply drive up to the drive-through window day two and demand the coffee again. You've given them the money's spent up, and that's all it's good for. The creation of academic work for a grade works very much the same way. Once the work has been created and handed in the first time, it's spent up. It can't simply be used again in its original form. Now, there is always, again, some gray area, like I said. In the case of plagiarism and paper recycling, the issue here is that, well, an instructor might notice that the thing itself has happened. Usually, before we're ready to accuse anyone of plagiarism, we need to find some evidence of either motive or at least a lack of attention paid to academic honesty practices. Basically, at the beginning, we're going to assume it's a mistake, but as any teacher encounters more and more plagiarism, that tends to be the best evidence that it isn't a mistake. Basically, most plagiarism can be seen as resulting from an inability to link specific ideas with their specific sources. Once that is no longer possible, plagiarism simply becomes another name for the natural confusion that results. Right? So it begins as something that could just be an error, but as the errors mount up more and more, that natural confusion that results ends up getting called plagiarism because it really is an academic honesty problem regardless of intent.